For 60 years, the single most important set of human remains in the entire story of the Americas sat forgotten in a wooden drawer in a museum basement in Copenhagen, Denmark. Nobody knew what they were holding. Nobody knew that the bones in that drawer belonged to a people who, according to every textbook ever printed, were not supposed to exist. A people who lived in Ice Age Alaska for thousands of years, watched the world change around them, and then vanished so completely that they left no descendants alive today to tell us they were ever here at all. And then, in a lab colder and quieter than the cave those bones came from, scientists cracked open the DNA locked inside them. And what they found rewrote the founding story of 2 continents. It revealed an entire lost population of human beings. And it forced every archaeologist alive to admit that the story we've been telling about how the Americas were first settled, the story in your school books, the story on the museum plaques, was incomplete in a way nobody had imagined. This is not a theory. This is not a some believe story. This is peer-reviewed, published, hard genetic science. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why a handful of 14,000-year-old bone fragments from a frozen cave in western Alaska quietly detonated everything we thought we knew about the peopling of half the planet, including, very possibly, where your own oldest ancestors were standing 20,000 years ago. Stay with me, because the payoff at the end of this story is one of the most staggering things I've ever come across. Let's start where the bones came from. There is a place on the far western edge of Alaska called the Seward Peninsula. It's a long, cold arm of land that reaches out toward Russia, and on a clear day, from the right bluff, you can actually stand there and see across the Bering Strait to another continent. It is, quite literally, the closest that North America comes to Asia, and that detail is going to matter enormously in a few minutes, so file it away. Up in the limestone hills above a dry basin called Iatayet, there are 2 openings in the rock. They're called the Trail Creek Caves. They don't look like much, narrow, dark, easy to walk past. But those caves are one of the only accessible windows we still have into a world that is otherwise completely gone. Because when the first human beings sheltered inside them, the map of the Earth looked nothing like it does now. Back in the late 1940s and early 1950s, a Danish archaeologist named Helge Larsen came to those caves and started digging. And the cave floor gave up an incredible mix of material: stone tools, ivory implements carved by human hands, the bones of animals that don't exist anymore in that landscape, mammoth, ancient bison, caribou, the great fauna of the Ice Age tundra, and mixed in among all of it, fragments of something far more precious: human bone. Larsen packed it all up and shipped it back home to Denmark, where it went into the collections of a museum in Copenhagen. And there it sat, for decades, cataloged, labeled, and essentially ignored. Now, here's a detail I keep turning over in my head, and I want you to sit with it for a second. In the 1950s, we had no way to read the information inside those bones. The technology simply did not exist, so a scientist held in his hands the answer to one of the biggest questions in human prehistory, and he had absolutely no idea. The evidence was just waiting. Waiting in a drawer, in the dark, for the world to invent the tools to finally hear what it had to say. It would wait more than half a century. To understand why those bones matter, you need to understand the question they ended up answering, and you need to meet the people who finally asked it correctly. For most of the last 100 years, the story of how humans reached the Americas was told like a simple relay race. The version you probably learned goes something like this. Sometime near the end of the last ice age, a band of hunters walked across a land bridge from Siberia into Alaska, chasing mammoths, and then poured south to fill 2 empty continents. Clean, simple, one wave, one direction, done. For a long time, that was the whole picture, and archaeologists were mostly fighting about the dates. But starting in the 2000s, a new kind of scientist walked into the room, and they didn't dig with trowels. They worked in sterile, clean labs that looked more like a semiconductor factory than an archaeology site. Full body suits, filtered air, the whole thing. Because the enemy of ancient DNA is contamination from living humans, and even a single skin cell from a researcher can ruin a 10,000-year-old sample. The leading figure in this world is a Danish evolutionary geneticist named Eske Willerslev, whose team in Copenhagen had already pulled off the seemingly impossible. sequencing entire genomes from ancient people who died thousands of years ago. These are people who figured out how to take a bone fragment the size of your fingernail and reconstruct, letter by letter, the genetic blueprint of the human who once carried it. And here is the beautiful, almost poetic twist. The bones that Helge Larsen had shipped back to Denmark in the 1950s, the Trail Creek Caves fragments, were sitting in that same country, in that same city, within reach of exactly the team that had invented the tools to finally read them. The drawer and the laboratory were, in the end, practically neighbors. It just took 60 years for the science to catch up to the shelf. When researchers finally pulled those fragments and a handful of other ancient Alaskan and Beringian remains into the clean lab and began to sequence them, they weren't expecting to blow up a textbook. They were expecting to confirm the relay race story. What they got instead was a genetic signal that made no sense until it made too much sense. And it pointed to a group of people nobody had ever named, because nobody had ever known they existed. Here's what happened when the results came back. When you sequence an ancient genome, you compare it against everyone else's modern populations, other ancient samples, and you essentially build a family tree, working out who's related to whom and how long ago their lineages split apart. And when the scientists slotted these Alaskan remains onto the family tree of Native American peoples, the DNA refused to sit where it was supposed to. The genome did not match any known Native American population. Not the peoples of the Arctic, not the First Nations of Canada, not any group in North, Central, or South America. It was related to all of them. Clearly, this was unmistakably a founding American lineage, but it belonged to a distinct branch that had split off from the ancestors of every other Native American group a very, very long time ago, and had then simply stopped. It stayed put. It stayed isolated, up there in the north, while the rest of the family walked on. Let me put a number on it, because the number is the whole point. This lineage diverged from the ancestors of all other Native Americans somewhere around 20,000 years ago. And then it remained separate, walled off, for thousands of years after that. These weren't the ancestors of the people who spread across the Americas. They were their cousins, a parallel branch. A sister population that peeled away from the main group early before the Great Migration South had even begun and went its own way. The researchers had to give this newly discovered people a name. They called them the Ancient Beringians. And I need you to feel the weight of that moment, because it's easy to skate past. An entire population of human beings, men, women, children, who lived and hunted and raised families and buried their dead for thousands of years, had been completely erased from the human story. Not misunderstood, not misfiled, erased. We had no oral tradition of them, no name for them, no place for them on any chart. They existed only as a whisper of chemistry, inside a few forgotten bones. And if Larsen had never dug that cave, or if that drawer had been thrown out in some museum renovation, we would never, ever have known they walked the earth. That is how close an entire branch of humanity came to vanishing without a trace. So who were they? And where, exactly, were they living? To answer that, we have to bring back a piece of the planet that no longer exists. During the last ice age, so much of the world's water was locked up in mile-thick glaciers that the sea level dropped by more than 100 meters. And when the ocean pulled back, it exposed a vast plain of land connecting Siberia and Alaska, where the Bering Strait is today. This wasn't a narrow little bridge, like the name suggests. It was a subcontinent, a cold, dry, grassy world roughly the size of Australia, teeming with mammoth and horse and bison. Scientists call it Beringia. And this is the part that gives me chills. When you stand at the entrance of the Trail Creek Caves today and look out toward Russia, you are looking at the grave of a country, because Beringia is gone. When the Ice Age ended and the glaciers melted, the sea came roaring back in and swallowed the entire thing. The homeland of the ancient Beringians, the plains they hunted, the rivers they camped along, the ground where untold generations of them are buried, is now sitting under hundreds of feet of cold, gray ocean. It is one of the largest lost homelands in all of human history, and almost nobody has ever heard of it. The Trail Creek Caves matter so much precisely because they sit on one of the last surviving scraps of that drowned world, high enough ground that the flood never reached them. Most of Canada, meanwhile, was buried under an ice sheet a mile thick, sealing off the route south for thousands of years. So, for a long stretch of the Ice Age, this pocket of the far north was, in a sense, its own isolated island of humanity, cut off from Asia behind them and cut off from the Americas ahead of them by a wall of ice. And the ancient Beringians were the people trapped, or perhaps sheltered, in the middle of it. Now here's where this discovery stops being a fun fact and starts genuinely rewriting human history, because the ancient Beringians didn't just add a new twig to the family tree. They proved a theory that had been fiercely argued about for years, a theory called the Beringian standstill. Think back to that simple relay race story. Walk across the bridge, keep going south, fill the continents. The problem geneticists kept running into is that the DNA said the ancestors of Native Americans had split off from their Asian relatives thousands of years before they actually show up in the archaeological record down in the Americas. There was this enormous, unexplained gap. Where were these people for all those thousands of years? What were they doing? The answer, which the ancient Beringians confirm, is astonishing. They weren't walking, they were waiting. The founding population of the Americas got stuck in Beringia, hemmed in by ice sheets to the east and inhospitable Siberia behind them, and they stayed there, in genetic isolation, for something on the order of thousands of years. A whole population, marooned in a drowned-to-be world, quietly becoming genetically distinct from everyone they'd left behind. And it was during that long standstill, in that isolated northern refuge, that one branch our ancient Beringians peeled off from the rest. Then, when the ice finally cracked open and a corridor south became passable, the other branch, the ancestors of virtually every indigenous person from Alaska to Argentina, poured through and spread across 2 continents at breathtaking speed. But the ancient Beringians? They didn't go. Some of their cousins kept walking. They stayed. They remained in the north, in Alaska, and the shrinking edge of Beringia, and lived out their entire existence up there. So the tidy one-wave story is dead. In its place is something far richer and stranger. A founding population that sat still for millennia in a lost country, split into branches while it waited, and sent only part of itself south, leaving the rest behind to become a ghost. That is not a footnote. That is a fundamentally different map of how our species conquered the last great empty half of the world. I want to pull us out of the abstract genetics for a second, because it's easy to forget these were people, not data points. And the cave gives us little glimpses of their actual lives. Remember what was on that cave floor, alongside the human bone, the ivory tools, the worked stone, the remains of mammoth and bison and caribou? That's not the debris of helpless people barely surviving. That's the signature of expert Ice Age hunters who had mastered one of the harshest environments the human body has ever faced. To live in Beringia meant surviving winters that would kill an unprepared adult in hours, tracking enormous and dangerous animals across open tundra, and knowing that landscape, its ice, its light, its migrations with a precision we can barely imagine from our heated homes. Their survival depended, above all else, on that mastery. They were not primitives clinging on. They were the most capable people on the planet at doing the single hardest thing a human could do, thriving where almost nothing else could. And I think there's something quietly haunting about a group so skilled, so perfectly adapted to their world, still ending up as a lineage that faded out, because we still don't fully know why they died out. Their world literally dissolved beneath them, the sea eating their homeland, the mammoths and other great animals dwindling toward extinction, the climate flipping the entire ecosystem they'd built their lives around. A people can be brilliant at surviving one world and still not survive the death of that world. That's a heavy thought, and it's worth sitting with. It's also, honestly, a little too relevant to our own moment for comfort. Now, a discovery this big doesn't get to stand on a few cave fragments alone. Extraordinary claims need more than one piece of evidence, and this is exactly where a lot of shocking history stories fall apart, so I want to be straight with you about why this one holds up. Because the ancient Beringians didn't only turn up in the Trail Creek caves. The clearest, most complete evidence for them came from another site in the interior of Alaska, along the Tanana River, at a place called Upward Sun River. There, archaeologists uncovered the burial of 2 infants who died around 11,500 years ago, one just 6 weeks old, one likely stillborn. The local native community named the older child in their language The name translates to something like sunrise girl child. When that little girl's genome was sequenced, it delivered the same shocking signal. She belonged to this distinct, isolated lineage, the Ancient Beringians, that had split from the other founding Americans around 20,000 years ago and stayed apart. Two separate Alaskan sites, two independent lines of genetic evidence, the same lost population. That is what turns a curiosity into a rewrite of the textbook. When two completely different bodies, buried thousands of years and hundreds of miles apart, tell you the same impossible story, you stop calling it a fluke and you start calling it history. And it's the combination that makes it bulletproof. The Upward Sun River infants gave a beautifully preserved, high-quality genome. The Trail Creek Caves, individual younger, from that windswept peninsula pointing at Russia, showed the ancient Beringians were still around and still distinct, even later in time, and in a different part of Alaska. Together, they don't just prove these people existed. They sketch the outline of a population that persisted in the far north for thousands of years, while the rest of the human world moved on without them. Now, I'd be doing you a disservice if I made this sound like every scientist joined hands and agreed. They didn't. Prehistory is a brawl, and this discovery landed in the middle of several fights that are still going on. So let's steelman the other side, because the doubts are real, and they're interesting. First, there's a genuine scientific debate about the exact shape of the family tree. Does the DNA mean the ancient Beringians split off in Beringia itself? Or did they and the other Native Americans actually diverge earlier, back in Asia, before either group ever set foot in the Americas? Those are two meaningfully different stories, and careful researchers have argued for both. The bones tell us these people were distinct. They don't hand us a perfect map of exactly where and when the split happened. Second, and this is a big one, there's the fight over timing in the very first Americans. This whole genetic model leans on the idea that people came through a corridor at the end of the Ice Age. But there are archaeological sites, some of them hotly contested, that seem to show humans were already deep in the Americas, far earlier than that, thousands of years before the standstill population supposedly headed south. There are footprints in New Mexico that some scientists date to more than 20,000 years ago. If those dates hold, then the story has even more chapters we haven't sequenced yet, and the ancient Beringians are one thread in a tapestry that's messier than anyone's tidy diagram. And third, there's the honest limitation of the evidence itself. We are building the biography of an entire vanished people out of a handful of individuals, a few bone fragments in Denmark, two infants by a river. That's an incredibly thin thread to hang 2 continents worth of history on. And a responsible scientist will tell you that the next genome out of the Alaskan permafrost could complicate this whole picture again. That's not a weakness of the discovery. That's just how frontier science works. Every answer buys you 3 new questions. So no, this isn't closed. The ancient Beringians didn't end the argument about the peopling of the Americas. In a lot of ways, they lit it on fire. But here's the thing, and I want to be careful and fair here. None of those debates actually undo the core discovery. Watch the distinction, because it matters. You can argue about exactly when the ancient Beringians split off. You can argue about whether some other group beat everyone to the Americas by footprint alone. You can wish we had 100 genomes instead of a handful. And you can grant every single one of those points, and the central earth-moving fact still stands, untouched. There was a distinct population of human beings, closely related to Native Americans, but belonging to their own separate branch, who lived in the Alaskan North for thousands of years and then disappeared without leaving descendants among us. That's not the contested part. That's the part the DNA states flatly, from 2 different sites, with no ambiguity at all. The debates are arguments about the frame around the picture. The picture itself, a lost branch of humanity, pulled out of a drawer after 60 years, is not in question. And that's the difference between this and the endless mystery stories that never actually prove anything. This one already crossed the line from what if to this happened. Everything the skeptics are fighting about is what happens next, not whether it happened at all. Which brings us, finally, to why any of this should matter to you sitting there, thousands of years and thousands of miles away from a frozen cave you'll never visit. So here's the part I promised you at the very beginning. Here's why a few 14,000-year-old bones from a forgotten drawer genuinely changed the human story forever. And I want you to really let this land, because it's bigger than Alaska, and it's bigger than a footnote about migration routes. Start with this. Every single indigenous person in the Americas today, from the Inuit of the Arctic, to the nations of the Great Plains, to the peoples of the Amazon, to the descendants of the Maya and the Inca, hundreds of millions of people, across 2 entire continents, traces their deep ancestry back to that tiny, isolated band of humans, marooned for thousands of years in a cold, dry, now drowned country most people have never heard of. 2 whole continents worth of human civilization. Every city, every language, every empire that rose in the Americas before Columbus sprang from a handful of people who spent millennia waiting out an ice age on the edge of the world. That is one of the most improbable and beautiful facts in all of human history, and we only know it because we learned to read DNA. But the ancient Beringians add the twist that makes it unforgettable, because they are the branch that didn't make it. They are the reminder that the story of humanity is not a clean line of winners marching forward. It's a tree full of branches that grew and lived, and then simply ended whole peoples who were every bit as real, as skilled, as fully human as the ancestors who happened to walk south and inherit the world. The ancient Beringians are a ghost limb on the family tree of our species. They had no way to leave us a message. No writing, no monument, no descendant to carry their name. By every normal measure of history, they were gone, forever deleted so thoroughly that for thousands of years, no living human even suspected they had ever existed. And then we brought them back. Not with magic, with science. We reached into a set of bones that had been sitting silent in a drawer for 60 years. Bones a brilliant man held in his own hands without ever knowing what they were. And we made them speak. And they told us their entire story. Where they lived, when they split from the rest of us, how long they waited, and the fact that they were here at all. A whole people, resurrected from oblivion by the information written in their own cells. That is the real discovery. Not just that the map of the first Americans was wrong, though it was. It's that human beings have crossed a threshold where death and time, and even total historical erasure, are no longer the final word. A population can vanish for 14,000 years, leave not one soul behind to remember them, and we can still, in a clean white lab in Copenhagen, learn their names for them. We can give a lost branch of our own species its place back in the story. The ancient Beringians waited 14,000 years in the dark to finally be heard. We are the first generation of humans in all of history capable of hearing them. And the next time you see one of those simple little arrows on a map, marching neatly out of Asia and down into the Americas, I want you to remember what that arrow leaves out. A drowned homeland, a people who waited, a branch that ended, and a drawer in Copenhagen that held the truth for 60 silent years, just waiting for us to finally be ready to listen. That's the discovery that changes human history forever. And the most staggering thought of all? There are more drawers, more caves, more silent bones, in more forgotten collections all over the world. Which means the story of who we are, and who we used to be, isn't finished being rewritten. It's barely begun.